How time turned against killers in cold cases solved in 2025. The first call came in before dawn, and the detective on the line didn't bother with pleasantries. Only a question that carried the weight of 38 years. Are you absolutely sure the DNA wasn't contaminated? The evidence locker in Douglas County, Colorado, had not been opened since 1987. The paper bag inside it, creased, brittle, smelling faintly of dust and old glue, had been logged, sealed, and forgotten. Inside that bag were trace skin cells left by a woman who had never made it home. Back then, they were useless. In 2025, they were able to name her killer. Time had not erased the crime. It had simply waited. Across the United States, something similar was happening. Files long written off as unsolvable were being pulled from shelves, digitized, and fed into systems that did not forget. Genetic genealogy, advanced DNA extraction, and renewed cold case units were dragging the past into the present, often kicking and screaming. Investigators called it a renaissance. Families called it closure. Those closest to the work knew better. It felt like an awakening. In January 2025, the Douglas County Sheriff's Office announced that multiple unsolved homicides dating back to the 1980s had been officially cleared. One case involved a woman found near a service road. Her life ended quietly, efficiently. The suspect, a known serial offender, had died years earlier, free and unbothered by consequence. His name was spoken publicly for the first time, not as an accusation, but as a conclusion. Justice, technically delivered. Morally unfinished. For the families, the announcement arrived like a delayed echo. Some wept, others stared ahead in silence, realizing that the man responsible had gone to his grave without ever knowing the fear he had inflicted would one day find him. Time had protected him, even as it preserved his guilt. The same month in New Hampshire, a child finally received her name. She had been known for decades as the little girl in the barrel, one of the victims found in Bear Brook State Park in 2000. Her remains had been sealed in steel drums, hidden among trees that had watched seasons come and go without speaking. The case haunted investigators nationwide, not because of what was known, but because of what wasn't. In 2025, forensic genealogy did what years of traditional investigation could not. The child was identified as Rhea Rasmussen. She had lived briefly. She had been loved somewhere once. Her name surfaced not because someone confessed, but because distant relatives had unknowingly shared pieces of themselves online, fragments that eventually formed her face. The announcement was quiet, respectful, but something about it felt wrong. Not the science, not the identification, but the timing. Rhea Rasmussen had been dead for decades. The man responsible had long since been identified in other crimes. Nothing about the revelation stopped future harm. It only proved that the truth, when finally revealed, can arrive too late to matter. In Dallas, Texas, a missing persons case from 1973 was quietly updated. A 16-year-old boy who vanished after a movie theater outing had never been found, until investigators realized he had been misidentified decades earlier. His body had been recovered, buried under another name, his disappearance a clerical ghost that haunted his family for 52 years. The correction came from a photograph, a single image, digitized and compared against databases that did not exist when the boy vanished, finally aligned the past with reality. Records were amended. A family was notified. The official language called it a resolution, but the truth was simpler and colder. The system had failed him, and time had hidden the mistake until no one was left to answer for it. in Rhode Island, 2 women whose murders had lingered unsolved for decades finally saw their cases closed. One suspect had died before charges could ever be filed. Another had left behind letters, confessions discovered only after his own death. The words inside were enough to confirm what investigators had suspected for years. The letters were written calmly, methodically. There was no remorse, only accounting. Investigators noticed something unsettling as they reviewed the documents. The man had written as though he expected to be believed eventually, as though time itself was his accomplice. Across the country, cold case units reported similar experiences. Evidence long considered inert was suddenly alive with information. Old fingerprints yielded results. Degraded DNA samples produced names. Students at universities assisted law enforcement combing through files as academic exercises that ended in arrests. The dead were speaking, and they were saying the same thing over and over. You didn't forget us. You just assumed we would stay quiet. For those working inside the system, analysts, technicians, archivists, the shift was not celebratory, it was oppressive. The backlog of history pressed inward. Every solved case illuminated 10 more unsolved ones. Every name revealed raised the question of how many had escaped justice simply by outliving the limits of technology. One forensic analyst in the Midwest described the sensation as being watched by paperwork. She spoke of opening files that seemed to anticipate her presence, of timestamps that appeared before she touched a keyboard. Her colleagues laughed it off as exhaustion, burnout. She stopped coming to work in October. Her desk was cleared by November. Officially, nothing was wrong. In Maryland, a 2001 murder case finally broke after 23 years. Genetic genealogy identified a suspect who had lived openly, built a life, and raised children. His arrest made national headlines. The narrative was clean. Science triumphs, justice prevails. But investigators reviewing the original crime scene photographs noticed anomalies, reflections that didn't match the documented personnel, shadows where none should have been. A sense, unprovable, undocumented, that someone had been present who was never listed in the reports. The anomalies were dismissed. They always were. By mid-2025, law enforcement agencies quietly acknowledged a pattern they couldn't explain publicly. Cold cases weren't just being solved. They were clustering, surfacing in waves, files accessed in the middle of the night, systems logging activity without clear user input, digital audits that traced back to authorized credentials but no human memory of the work being done. IT departments blamed automated processes, scheduled indexing, background scripts. No one liked the alternative explanation. The truth was harder to articulate, but impossible to ignore. Time was no longer neutral. For decades, criminals had relied on it. Witnesses died, evidence degraded, memories blurred. The clock had always been on their side. Now that same clock had turned against them, and it was relentless. In November, Dallas police announced the arrest of a suspect in a 44-year-old murder. DNA, extracted from preserved evidence, finally matched a living man. The victim's family attended the press conference, their faces strained, their relief muted by the knowledge that nothing could restore what was taken. After the announcement, an officer quietly remarked to a colleague that the evidence file had been flagged months earlier, before the lab had officially begun testing it. Like it was waiting, he said. By December, the phrase "justice delayed" appeared in headlines, so often it lost meaning. Commentators praised technology. Documentaries rushed into production. Viewers consumed the stories as entertainment. safe in the knowledge that these horrors belong to the past. They didn't see the pattern forming beneath the surface. Every breakthrough carried a cost: emotional, institutional, psychological. Investigators began experiencing vivid dreams tied to cases they had never worked. Archivists reported anxiety attacks triggered by file numbers. Families who received long-awaited answers sometimes described an overwhelming sense of being summoned rather than informed, as if the truth had chosen them. The final case of the year never made the news. It involved no public figure, no serial killer, no dramatic arrest, just a man who had believed for decades that he had gotten away with it. The evidence against him had been weak, the investigation sloppy. The file is shelved. In 2025, a routine database update connected his DNA to a forgotten sample. He was 78 when detectives knocked on his door. He listened calmly as they spoke, nodded once, and said something that stopped them cold. "I knew you'd come eventually," he said. "I just thought I'd be dead first." He wasn't afraid. That was the most unsettling part. As the year ended, cold case units across the country reported unprecedented clearance rates. Families lit candles. Detectives retired feeling vindicated. The system congratulated itself. But beneath the statistics, a quieter realization took hold among those closest to the work. Justice had not been delivered so much as reclaimed, torn loose from the hands of time itself. And time, once exposed as unreliable, could never be trusted again. Because time does not heal, it does not forgive. It only waits. So remember this. Remember what this story teaches you. Silence is not safety. Distance is not absolution. The past does not sleep. It watches, patient and exacting, waiting for the moment when the truth becomes unavoidable. Promise yourself you will never dismiss the feeling that something unresolved is still watching you. Never assume that what is buried will stay buried. Never believe that time is on your side. A lesson to learn from this story. And when the quiet hours stretch long and the past begins to stir, ask yourself, what is waiting for you to notice? Please subscribe for more chilling tales. Thank you.